session of the year. You should now have a message on your screen to remind you that this session is being recorded. You can get rid of it by just clicking on the Got It button. Can I ask those of you who are joining us and are not part of the GeogLive team or not presenting tonight, if you could please mute yourself and also turn off your cameras. It's better for the environment. It's always important, but particularly today. But please do use the chat to join in with the discussion. You can say who you are, you can ask questions, you can make comments, you can share great resources and ideas, share work that you've done in school. It's really great when so many people join in. It just adds to the richness of this community we're building here around our GeogLive sessions. So I've welcomed you all now. I think there are still people joining us. Oh, hi Joe, lovely to see you again. Joe is somebody I did some work with earlier in the year. Anthony, could you just go on to the next screen, please? And I can remind people about these things. So just a reminder for those of you who are just joining us, we are recording this session today, as we record all our sessions, and we will be posting it on YouTube later today. And you will be able to see not only this session, but all our other sessions on our YouTube channel, if you would like to look at them again. I've already asked those of you who joined earlier on, if you could please turn your cameras off until we get to the end of the session. You're very welcome to put them on for the question and A. But in the meantime, please do use the chat to say who you are, where you're from, to ask questions, to make comments, to share ideas, anything else you'd like to do. A couple of other points. This session is brought to you by the Early Years and Primary Phase Committee of the Geographical Association. The Geographical Association is the primary association for all geography teachers, all teachers of geography in primary and in secondary schools, and in fact it also with many members who work in post-16 and even universities. So this is brought to you by the Early Years and Primary Phase Committee. The Geographical Association is a membership organisation. The members are there's a lot of members, about half of whom are now primary, which is great to know. We haven't always had that many primary members in the association, and it's your association if you're a member. If you're not a member, please do join. You can join for free membership, and you can also join as a full member. We're really keen to know what ideas you have about what we as a committee should be doing. So please do tweet us. You can see our tweet handle is there, Twitter handle is there on the screen. And one final reminder before we get going, which is that all the ideas that are being expressed here belong to the speakers. We are really happy for you to share our ideas, but we really would appreciate you acknowledging the work as ours, naming us and giving us credit where where you're using our ideas. Okay. I think that's everything I wanted to say at the moment. So if we could move on. Thank you, Anthony. So the schedule for today is absolutely fantastic one. We've got this really important topic, climate education and sustainability education. First of all, we've got Stephen Scoffham and Steve Rawlinson, who are talking about their book, Sustainability Education, which, as I'm sure many of you know, has already won 2 awards and is up for a 3rd award. It's an absolutely fabulous book. I'd really recommend it to you if you've not seen it yet. Then we have Sophie, who is talking about a project that she is in fact still working on with her Year 6 class, and the title of that is Sustainability and Climate Change, so it's completely perfect for tonight. And then last but not least, we have Anthony, who is talking about the big picture made small, local changes and local impacts, and his theme is water. So lots of really great inputs for you tonight. There will be time for questions and answers at the end, we hope. Please do put any questions or comments in the chat. Tess, can I hand over to you to talk about the latest edition of Primary Geography, please?
For sure. Thank you very much, Julia, and thanks everyone for being here today. It's great. Really excited to be able to promote our latest edition of Primary Geography, which has a focus on fresh geographies, which I think you'll agree is really suitable and appropriate for the summer. Although some of us may not be feeling so fresh at the moment, at the end of a long and muggy day, But there's lots of fresh ideas in this edition, and also there's quite a bit of refreshing that's being done within this edition as well. So we've got an article on reconceptualizing time and thinking about it in different ways, trying to be not too tied to the bell all the time, and considering strategies for allowing children both to get into their geographical learning and out of it. So finishing things off, ideas around how we can finish off pieces of work without just having to finish off in break time or something like that before rushing off to the next thing. So really enhancing that geographical learning. We've got an article on flood resilience, which maintains our focus in the journal on climate change and sustainability, again, very appropriate for today, and how we help children to think about how we're adapting to and dealing with more extreme forms of weather while reducing our impact on the environment. So you don't have to be in flood-prone areas in order for it to be relevant, and it can be adapted to lots and lots of different situations. So there are lots of really great practical interactive ideas around that. And a further article that we've got with the sustainability theme shows how we can make the most of our school grounds, not just more engaging and child-friendly with real learning opportunities, but also more tasty and delicious. And that's the one on edible school gardens. So I think there's lots to find in that. We take a fresh look at combining subject disciplines. We've got an article about archaeology and geography and how they complement and enhance each other while developing a sense of place, which is really, really helpful. Traditional geography skills such as compass directions and map work are refreshed in 2 of the articles, and we've got one of those is focused on the early years. We also have an article on mixed age progression and how the challenge of small classes with multiple age groups can be addressed and actually turned to children's learning advantage. We've got our second article in the review of the PGQM research, focusing on school leadership with some really useful ideas for enabling high quality geography. And finally, we've got all the brilliant features. We've got the Start Gallery, lots of ideas for getting going on geography ideas, primary geography and practice, so how you can incorporate those in your practice, and an interview. Our interview is with Stephen Sterling, who is the Professor of Sustainability Education at Plymouth University. So the perfect focus of today's Geography Live, GeogLive, sorry. And we've also got, if you could go on to the next slide, Anthony, please, just some relevant publications from the Geographical Association, which are appropriate for today's session. We've got our book, Leading Primary Geography, the handbook for all classroom teachers, Caring for Our World, the In the Know series, various ones on that, and our super scheme. So do please have a look in the geography shop. The link is there, and well, if you just go onto the GA site, and you will find all of the resources there. So those are some specific ones for today, and lots of other ones. So I think that's probably it for me, Julia, if that's okay.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tess. And I'm just going to say a little bit about National Fieldwork Fortnight. National Fieldwork Fortnight, last week was National Fieldwork Week. It's turned into a fortnight because it was so successful, particularly in primary schools. And the GA is providing lots of free resources to encourage everybody to get outside and do some fieldwork during National Fieldwork Fortnight, which starts on the 26th of June. So it starts next Monday and it runs for a fortnight, although in fact you can do any of the activities at any time, of course. But it is a really exciting initiative from the Geographical Association. As I say, very successful last year, so extended to this year and doubled in length. And as you can see, there is on the screen, there is a National Fieldwork Fortnight PowerPoint presentation you can download to share with your colleagues if you would like. But there is also lots and lots of useful support and advice, and you can see some of the areas of this section of the GA website in front of you. And there are quite a lot of fully developed activities for primary in that third category there, saying developed activities for primary. So please do explore that. I'm sure you'll find lots of things that are useful there. It's completely free to anybody to join. You do not need to be a member to access this part of the site, nor to download any of the materials. And there is a certificate for every school and every child that takes part. So please do explore what's there. I'm sure you'll find lots of things that are of use to you to use. And of course, the theme this year is environment, which could hardly be better for tonight. Okay, thank you, Anthony. We're now going to move on to our first input of the evening, understanding sustainability. And this is being led by Stephen Scoffham and Steve Rawlinson. So I'll hand over to the two of you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Julia, and thank you everyone for coming this evening and for the invitation to contribute to the discussion about sustainability education and how we might respond to this really important issue. Stephen?
Right, as you can see, we've chosen a picture of a dragon to set aside this title slide, and we've selected the image because it encapsulates both the perils and the opportunities of the current moment. After all, what could be more fierce and more exciting than a dragon and the mythology that surrounds it?
Next slide, please, Anthony. So we've got two questions to guide our contribution this evening, and we hope our thoughts in answering those two questions will give you some background knowledge to the issue and show you how sustainability is relevant to your teaching in your classroom. The other contributions in the session will give you some practical examples of how this might be achieved. Next slide, please, Anthony.
So sustainability, it's a tricky area actually, and it's a contested concept. So what we're doing there is to putting up two slides, two different definitions. The diagram on the left, the one with the pillars, is a traditional way of thinking about sustainability, and you can see that those three pillars hold up sustainability, but they don't actually interact in any way as they do in reality. We rather favour the diagram on the right, where there are circles which show self, yourself, others, and future generations interacting in sustainability in lots of different ways. And that idea of highlighting interrelationships, personal responsibility, and social interaction is one that we favour. One point we think it's essential to emphasise is that the crisis in the natural world has been caused by people. It's not the natural world that's in crisis in a way, it's the human race. So we need to focus on our beliefs and attitudes in order to address the environmental crisis at a fundamental level. This puts education in the driving seat. Next slide, please. So one of the things which we're aware of is that there have been literally hundreds of emergency declarations about climate change and sustainability. On an international level, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals have been particularly noteworthy as they've been agreed by nations across the world. Also, they take a broad view. We put them together here in this diagram, showing the biosphere at the bottom as the foundations, the life on Earth and life on water at the bottom there. And then, as it were, depending on that, human society, and there are quite a lot of, there's 17 of these Sustainable Development Goals, so quite a lot of them to do with the way that society is organized. And then on the next layer, depending on that, is the economy, and fundamentally, right at the top of the pyramid is partnership. And the point being here, that if we erode our ecological base, this whole edifice collapses. Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. Yeah, thank
you. There have been lots of declarations recently and fine speeches by international leaders. Here are three. The Living Planet report, which is from the WWF, the message is clear and the lights are flashing red. We know what's happening. Here's all about wildlife. We know the risks and we know the solutions. And here's on the top right is Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, opening COP27. The global climate change will be won or lost in this crucial decade. Humanity has a choice, cooperate or perish. That's pretty stark stuff, and it hits you in the face, really. Sorry to sort of throw that straight at you at this time of day, but that's what our leaders are telling us. But the good news and the encouraging news in many ways it comes here again from UN agency UNESCO. We're confident that education is a powerful enabler of positive change of mindsets and worldviews, that it can support all dimensions of sustainability. So 3 international declarations there, which take us to some really important places.
And I think one of the things we'd like to add to that is that, put simply, the leaders of today, of tomorrow, are already sitting in front of us in our classrooms today. So what we teach now will inform and perhaps be a key influence on future policies and actions. So no pressure on us then, no pressure at all. So how can sustainability education be put into practice? The extraordinary thing about that is that there's so little comprehensive guidance to which teachers can turn for help. So what we did is try and give some guidance in our book. Next slide, please, Anthony. And this is our contribution to the debate. And what we've tried to do in this is to adopt a broad interactive definition of sustainability, try and tease out the general principles and concepts that underpin the argument, then set out a range of age-related practical teaching ideas and indicate how sustainability education might be developed across a whole school. We've tried to contextualize that within a wider educational framework, recognizing 3 key points: the general Earth care principles that are contained within the Earth Charter, the SDGs, which we've already just looked at, but also the thing that we emphasise, and Stephen emphasised right at the start there, the personal qualities that are going to be needed to implement it. So that's sort of like the basis on which we wrote the book. We certainly don't think we've got all the answers. I mean, nobody's got all the answers, but we hope that what we offer will provoke a debate and changes in approach. Next slide, please, Anthony.
So in the next 5 minutes, we're going to try and condense 80,000 words approximately into 5 minutes of presentation, which is quite a challenge. But one of the things we want to flag up is the fact that as a teacher educator, I know that sustainability has to fight to get even mentioned really in our training courses, and that many teachers across the country simply have never had any guidance or support in sustainability education and how to approach it. It's a complicated and extensive terrain, and there's a remarkably little support from the national curriculum, especially at primary school level. It doesn't actually feature in the geography orders or indeed anywhere else. Practical action and community action outside school is hard to organise, and it can be unpredictable. Pupils can feel easily overwhelmed when they learn about the problems of the world today, and we're not in that business of promoting doom and gloom. We want to focus on hope and possibilities for the future. So what's happening? Well, in general, I think the evidence is that teachers are opting for, when they're interested in sustainability, they're opting for timely issues around current events like plastic pollution. Much depends on individual enthusiasm. It often happens outside normal curriculum hours, and it's a patchy approach. So what we wanted to promote is a discussion around how a more organised and systematic approach to sustainability can be set about. So in the next slide, we will talk a little bit more about that. And one of the key things we want to say is that we want to put sustainability, sustainability moment in time needs to be a core central part of the curriculum, not something that's pigeonholed in a subject area, not something that's bolted on in extracurricular time, something that's absolutely at the central. And you can see there what we've done is we put all the different subjects around the edge. Maybe others, but that's a pretty good set of them, and sustainability at the center. This single module, this brings everything together. If you tackle sustainability simply in geography, where does it fit? Are you overlooking the opportunity for developing and talking about sustainability in history or in maths or English and so on? So there's always going to be an argument about subject integrity, and we'd also recognise that we want children to have a clear view of geography and the geography contribution to the sustainability approach. But primary school teachers generally are pretty experienced at bringing different topics together, at bringing different topics in an integrated way, and how you do that is really complicated, and it depends very much on your individual circumstances. But we're arguing for a holistic approach, and I think that undermining this is that question of what is education actually for? And if it's not about responding at a deep level to the fundamental issues that we're confronting, then are we really preparing children for the future, or are we simply preparing them for the next SATS test? That's the bottom line.
Next slide, please, Anthony. So to emphasize this idea of linkages between subjects, we identified just 12 areas of study which are indicative. They're not the totality of the thing, but they're indicative of the scope of the terrain of sustainability. So you might like to try and match the titles that we used to the images that appear there. And once you try and do that, a couple of things emerge very quickly. Weather and climate, which is sort of like the number one thing that people always think about with regard to sustainability, is actually just one topic. And I think that's really significant. It's one out of the 12 that we've got down there. Secondly, the areas of study all overlap. So you can use a picture more than once. And equally, some areas of study might link to 2 or 3 pictures. So everything's connected, and you do really need to take this holistic view that Stephen was taking just now. There are a number of other things we could sort of say about how we presented each of the topics. And again, this is trying to sort of formulate some way in which you could approach these things. We've given it an age-appropriate way into each of the topics that we took, and we thought that was really important because some things are more appropriate for particular ages. Secondly, the activities we suggest relate to many different areas of the curriculum, which raises the point that sustainability education doesn't need to appear as a separate subject, as Stephen has already said. Pigeonholing it in this way could be seen as counterproductive and as well as being impractical given the pressure of the school timetable. So we're not suggesting that sustainability, is pigeonholed in a particular way. Next slide, Stephen. Sorry, Anthony.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, and one of the other things which we're keen to emphasize is that there are different ways of knowing. And one of the focuses at the moment, which is we're being steered towards, is cognitive learning and factual knowledge, knowledge which is located in the head, as it were, if you want to look at it. So what we've got here is the classical way of expressing the different ways of knowing: 3 H's: head, heart, hands. So we're not saying that factual knowledge and learning as it were, the nuts and bolts of the subjects isn't important. Of course it is. Without factual knowledge, you can't make sound judgments, and you haven't got the tools of the trade, as it were. But equally, we recognise that children are not simply disembodied brains. We recognise that how they feel about things, how they respond to the world around them, is very important as well. In fact, one of the phrases which comes to mind here is you're not going to care for something that you don't love. So loving the environment and getting out there, forest schools, for example, is one of the ways in which many schools have tapped into this. But engaging children with the world around them, engaging their empathy is going to be just as important, or equally needs to be set alongside a factual knowledge, their sort of cognitive dimension. And then there's advocacy, actually doing something, because learning about the problems of the world is pretty frightening sometimes at the moment. But we certainly find at all levels, the response that we get is, well, what can I do? And that's where advocacy and action comes into play. And there are all sorts of wonderful things that are happening in schools where children, in lots of small ways, significant ways, small but significant, are actually doing something to address the problem. And so that's why we put hope at the center of this diagram, developing a sense of agency, not positioning. So children can't be positioned as victims. They need to be seen as active agents in the world around them, and harnessing their imagination, harnessing the ideas about a vision for the future. This is summed up by the environmental campaigner Satish Kumar as the idea of regenerative learning, learning which takes inspiration from and is directed towards nature and the planet that we live in and the people that we share that planet with. So all this is about a more holistic approach to learning, which I think is an important message at the current time.
Next
one, please.
And finally, we thought we'd end with this image, which we feel represents possibilities and hope. And that's really an important message, because it's so easy to be overwhelmed by the negative and depressing scenarios we hear every day and which our children face now and in the future. But at the same time, the image alludes to the active bubbles of good practice that are breaking out, both within and beyond the world of education, despite the current curriculum restraints. And one of the key messages in our talk today is the need for these initiatives to coalesce into bigger and bigger active bubbles to create a critical mass for educational change. Sharing ideas, as we're doing today, is one way of doing that. Providing the sense of belonging that sessions like this on GeogLive does is a major catalyst for the change that we think we need to actually have. And final slide, Anthony, please. So thank you very much for joining us, and we hope this has been some of you getting you thinking about the issues surrounding sustainability education within your classrooms, and we'd love to hear about what you're doing.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve and Stephen, for that brilliant overview of some of the fabulous contents of your book. I really do recommend everybody to have a look at it. I'd like to pass on to Sophie now, who's going to talk to us about putting some of these ideas into action with her Year 6 class. So over to you, Sophie.
Thank you. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to Steve and Stephen for providing that fantastic opening to tonight's GeogLive session. So this comes from a unit we do at the end of Year 6. We're doing it now in the summer term. This is our 3rd year of teaching this unit, and we have adapted and changed it slightly each year. It's still very much a fluid unit, so we do make changes to it often because there's so much you could cover. And I'm just going to share a couple of lessons from the unit. So what you can see on the screen at the moment is just our current unit overview. So on the far left of the screen, you've got the key knowledge, which we want the pupils to focus on. So for every one of our units across the curriculum in our entire school, we've tried to pick out 6 to 8 key essential pieces of knowledge that we want the children to leave that unit with. So for this topic, we want the children to be able to define sustainability as ensuring that we're meeting the needs of the current generation, and it is that meeting those needs does not negatively impact on the ability to meet needs of the future generations. So we've somewhat simplified the definition of sustainability for them. We then want them to be able to identify different types of natural resources and be able to begin to classify them into renewable and non-renewable. We look at different things, and we also look at which non-renewable resources are set to run out and when they're set to run out. We then move on to looking at different types of energy sources, including renewable and non-renewable energy sources. We build on their understanding of weather and climate, making sure they know the difference between weather and climate, and focus in on their knowledge of the greenhouse gas effect. We then bring together all of their learning from the whole of Key Stage 2, and we plan and conduct a piece of field work. This tends to change every year because I'm very changeable with my field work. I like planning new things to do, but overall we make sure they have the opportunity to plan a piece of field work and use charts and graphs or maps to show their findings, showing all the learning they've done with charts, graphs and maps over the course of Key Stage 2. And finally, we expect them to be able to name some influential figures who are kind of like our social activists in climate change, and begin to look at ways that individuals are making differences and how they as individuals can make a difference. In the middle, you've got how it links across to the national curriculum. So the key at the bottom tells you which domain of the national curriculum, and just what skills we're building in on the national curriculum. And then for each lesson, we break it down into a key question. So on the right of the screen, you've got the 6 key questions for the unit, which we tend to open each lesson with. Next slide, please. And just press enter one at a time, because otherwise all the screens will come up. So one of our first lessons, we look at what is sustainability. So this is the screen we show the children, just to show them that we want them to understand that sustainability means consuming natural resources to meet our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And we vaguely bring in a little bit of a link to the idea that this is not just natural resources, it's also social and economic resources, but we tend to go down the environmental and natural resources with the children's understanding at this stage. Next bit, please. So this brings us into natural resources. We check the children's understanding of if they know what a natural resource is. That they are materials or substances produced by the environment. We have to consume natural resources to survive. As a human race, we would not be able to survive if we did not consume them, because we use them to heat our homes, transport us around the road, feed us and clothe us. We then look at how we can define natural resources into renewable or non-renewable natural resources. And the children do a really simple sorting activity with this. We give them some different natural resources and they have a go at sorting them into the 2 columns. The link you can see down there at the bottom of the screen is just another article we bring up to build their understanding. Next part, please. Then we build on to a little bit more of a detailed activity. We use this fantastic atlas here called World in Maps. I have put the newer version of the atlas on the screen. The pages on this link to the old version, so it might not completely link up. But we look at a map in the World in Maps, and it's a map of where the main producers of natural resources are in the world. We unpick that image with the children. We ask the children to begin to identify which countries on the maps are one of the main producers of at least 5 different natural resources. We discuss where they're located in the world. There's then a little bit on the map which tells them which natural resources are due to run out in the next 20 years. That sometimes surprises them. We look at where those natural resources are produced. We begin to discuss where those natural resources might be in things that the children consume. And we also just touch very briefly of the discussion on water being a natural resource, because there's a lovely little map picture in the book which shows where there's a shortage of water in the world. Once we've had that class discussion, if we go on to the next page, the children then have the opportunity to go away and have a go at producing their own map. So we print the outline off from Digimaps for School, and they have a go at producing their own map using their own key, where they show where some of the main producers of natural resources are in the world. We then complete a Diamond 9, where they have some natural resources and they have to think which ones are the most important natural resources for humans, which they find extremely tricky. And brings out lots of interesting discussions, because they really realise at that point we do need different natural resources to help us survive. So that's one of our first lessons, just getting the children to understand why we consume different things and how we can't just stop consuming natural resources at all. Next slide, please. Okay, we then move on to looking at where energy comes from. Again, we actually base it on the UK more this time. So we look at an image in this book atlas here. They look at, I would love to have put the images up. I wasn't sure of the copyrights, which was, so I didn't want to share the actual maps. But they look at a map of the UK and they begin to discuss what they notice about the location of solar energy, hydroelectrical energy and tidal power sites. For example, they notice that solar energy tends to be concentrated in the south of the country, and we can bring a discussion as to why that might be. Where is the hydroelectric sites? We look at where we notice about wind farms, what we notice about coal and oil and gas sites. And then there's these 2 fantastic pie charts on this map, one of which tells you where the energy comes from that we consume now, and one of which tells you what it will look like in I think it's 20 to 30 years, can't remember off the top of my head. And we begin to think, why do you think that's changing? And you notice that some of the renewable energy is going up and some of the non-renewable energy is going down, and we have a big discussion about why that might be. Next part, please. Once we have classified our energy, we've looked at different types of energy. The one slide I did not show on this, because I've just grabbed a few, is we also look at different types of energy. So we introduce the children to what solar energy is, hydroelectric energy is, tidal energy is. We discuss some of the pros and cons of each of those as well. We then do a mapping activity with them, so we can bring in, like, building on their map skills they've learned across Key Stage 2. The reference for this is at the bottom because it came from a DigiMaps for School article which Will Tuft wrote, so I put that on here and I'll try and copy that into the chat when I finish talking for anyone who wants to see it. But we go on DigiMaps for School, and their task is St Albans District Council wants to choose a wind farm for somewhere near our school because they want to build on having renewable energy sources around us, and they have to try and find a good location for those wind turbines. So we try and get them to look for the top of the hill, so they have to build on their contour line knowledge. So that can be a windy space. It has to have good noise separation from neighbours. They have to learn how to use the buffer tool to make sure they've got a good distance, and they need to look at the roads to check there's good access to the site as well. And then if we go on to the next page, we can just see a couple of examples I quickly grabbed from their books, where they've had a go at finding sites local to our school which they feel a wind farm might be. So the crosses and the triangles you can see is where they put their turbines, and they've tried to justify what they've noticed on the map that would make that a good location. Next slide, please. Again, we go back to the World in Maps book. This is where we begin to build on their knowledge of climate zones in particular. So they've learned about climate zones. We put that throughout, so it gets built on topic after topic, year after year. So by the time they get to us in year 6, they've done detailed studies on a lot of the climate zones. So we pull open a map of the world's climate, we look at the different climate zones, and we literally do a recap conversation of what they remember about the world's climate at the moment. And we, at this point, make sure they've got a really clear understanding of the difference between weather and climate. What is it we mean when we talk about climate? It's a long-term average of a particular place over 30 years. Weather is what's happening outside in one place right now. So we build on their knowledge of the climate zones here. Oh, and we also recap things like when you are in the mountains, the higher the altitude, it tends to be colder at that latitude. We look at the equator and the impact of the equator. We just go over all that key knowledge before we do anything else. Next part, please. Then this Vimeo video is a little book. It's a little bit, the year 6s get on with it. I wouldn't use it for children older than year 6. It's a video which is a little paper book, and it says, what is the link between penguins and polar bears? And it just introduced the concept of climate change in a really, really friendly way. Again, copy the link down, but I will try and post it in the chat when I finish speaking. It would be suitable for Key Stage 1 upwards. It just brings in the idea that humans are impacting the planet, and a very, very basic understanding of greenhouse effect that we then build on. So it just gives them that really simple, low stakes, not too scary understanding of what climate change might be. We then build on this little picture book that we watch. So next part, please. And we really then focus in on exactly what the greenhouse effect is. This is the screen we show them. We also look at it in a book called Climate Action. And we go over it in guided reading as well, because they tend to find it quite tricky. And we do have a YouTube video as well, which we use, which I have not got to share, but I will try and find it. And we talk about what greenhouse gases are. We particularly focus on carbon dioxide and methane. We talk about how human activity has increased the amount of those gases in the atmosphere. But we say without greenhouse gases, we don't want to get rid of all greenhouse gases, because without greenhouse gases, that would change our climate as well. So we make it really explicit to the children that our climate has always changed. that the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, we need them because they help keep our planet the temperature we need it to be to live. But over the last 150 years since the Industrial Revolution, and we do have to explain what that means to them, humans have been changing their activities. That's put more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that is causing our planet to warm. Next bit, please. Once we've done that, we give the children different, and as you can see, this is a very map heavy unit. We get the children to really build their map skills within this unit, but we give the children certain maps from these 3 books: Climate Action, the Climate Emergency Atlas, and World in Maps. And they're all different maps which show what the impacts of a warming climate might be. The children then have their own blank world map, and they have a go. We discuss the maps as a class, what they're showing us, and then they have a go at taking what they think is important information. They become cartographers, and then they show what they've learned about the impacts of climate change onto these maps. If you go on to the next page, here is just one example of a map that I grabbed, which one of my children produced this week. You can see how they've used figures, they've annotated, they've used a key, and they have used different bits to show what they've learned. Next slide, please. Our final lesson, because it's quite a scary topic, is we bring it back to social activism. So no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. So we talk about what we think David Attenborough means by that quote. Next slide, please. And then we look at some social activism, which is in our local area. So this is a team that launched a coffee cup recycling campaign. It comes with a little video, newspaper articles, so children in our area can see that other children in our area have done stuff to make a difference. We've got another example, which we use with the children, which is a more national one, but someone actually their age who's campaigned to stop plastic toys in magazines. And then we also look at, next little part, people from these 2 books who've done things across the world. So, and at this point, we really talk to the children about what they can do. And it's vast, and there's lots of different things they can do, but it's so important to empower the children at this point, because climate change can feel really scary. It can be a bit doom and gloom, and it's like, what can we all do as individuals to make a difference, and what are other people doing in the world to make a difference? We also back this up in our guided reading, where we take a couple of the people from Earth Heroes and we study those as guided reading texts. Next slide, please. We finish the topic with a double page spread where the children write about what they've learned, and you can see this child here has written other ways to be an Earth superhero and listed loads of things they've learned about what they can do to make a difference. Next slide, please. We feel it is really, really important to encourage sustainability across the curriculum. So we also make explicit links to it throughout our whole year about how we are showing the children that we aren't just talking about this in one topic and forgetting about it. So far in DT, we use recycled materials that the children have sourced, such as used clothes in our sewing topic when we design and make bags, rather than using new material. In DT as well, we talk about seasonality and local produce, building on our knowledge from our global trade topic. And we consider seasonality and locality when designing our cooking menu. We encourage the children to use charity shops and reuse clothing when finding their costumes for the Year 6 production and not buying them off Amazon. And we refer to the fact that makes us more sustainable. During the topic, they have access to all the books you can see on the screen and some more, because some were in use at the time, just to help reinforce their learning. And during fieldwork fortnights this year, the children will be exploring biodiversity in the local area as part of that unit. And then they'll be doing some kind of work on how you can increase biodiversity. In previous years, we've done litter surveys and done campaigns about litter, but we always try and make sure our fieldwork gives them some form of activism within the school. Next slide, please. Finally, I've mentioned a lot of books tonight, so if you scan the QR code on here, you'll be able to download this little sheet, which will give you the books, which the first 6 are the key ones that we use. And then on the other page are the ones that I'm using to support. So you've got that to take away with you. Thank you very much. I know I've spoken for a really long time, sorry. But yeah, thank you. And do ask questions in the chat if you have any.
Thank you, Sophie. That was absolutely great. It's lovely to see many of the principles that Steve and Stephen were talking about. in practice in your classroom with your Year 6 class. So thank you very much indeed. I can see in the chat there's lots of people saying what great ideas you're offering. So thank you for that. I'm sure people will be picking them up and using them. Anthony, can I pass on to you, please? I think you've already put your first slide up.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Steve and Stephen and Sophie. Brilliant start to the event. So this is the final session for today. So do stay with it if you can. I'm going to be applying and deepening and broadening some of those ideas that we've been hearing about so far, because a lot of what we've heard about so far has been about a big picture, a kind of UK or possibly even a global perspective. And I really want us to think, to kind of bring this together at the end, about what locally could be being observed and what those local impacts might be, and maybe some of the small local changes that could be made to actually change and adapt and build the environment that we have near us to be better for the future. So just to frame the discussion, really, I just want to give my kind of oversight just to tell you where I'm coming from. So we are here, you are wherever you are, and our best geographical resources are always what's in front of us, are always our things that we can see from our window, things that we can see from our doorstep, what's in our local park and things like that. So that's where I'm coming from in framing this discussion in this next 10-minute slot. So geography teaching, as you've seen already, is always at a different range of scales, sometimes at the global scale to look at a world map, but always we're trying to connect that to the context that we are in. And this should also be the case when we're trying to teach about sustainability and weather change and climate change, which is what we're particularly focusing on today. But I just want you to think about, as we start this discussion, but where are you? I've said you are where you are, I'm where I am, but maybe you're on the coast, maybe you're in a city, maybe you're in a town or a village. What is the climate story there? Have you ever really thought about how the current hot weather, how the kind of sudden downpours that we've had recently, those kind of flood conditions that we have that kind of come and go, how are they really impacting on the spaces and places near you? That's something I really want to tap into, that particular story about water falling from the sky and how that water is dealt with. Because climate change, the world that we're getting towards, will impact different places in many, many different ways. And certainly when I'm teaching our students, when I'm teaching children, I really want them to possibility think. I want them to think, what's the probability of certain things happening? What if in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, in 5 days, in 10 days, in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? And this thinking that David Hicks has taught us about over many years about possibility and probability and preferable futures. What is the future from what we can see from near us? And then I'm going to round off this kind of session with just trying to think about the UK perspective, trying to look at the Lake District, trying to look at a perspective from the upland hills, because they're probably quite contrasting to the places that you're actually in, and how that might tie into where you are specifically. So really it's about everyday conversations, it's about your hyper-local, and it's about how you can hopefully start conversations with your children, with your staff, with your governors, about the effects that you might actually see. But of course, we need to think about how climate change will impact not just the world, but actually the UK. And this is what the Met Office are actually telling us. And I've color-coded these for a reason, because the blue bits are particularly to do with water, to do with flooding, to do with storms. So we're going to have sea levels which will keep on rising. We're going to have increased danger of flooding, with low-lying and coastal cities being at a particular risk. Farming is going to suffer. Hotter weather and higher levels of CO2 may make growing crops easier or more difficult, or it may produce new ones. We may be able to have grapes, and we've all heard those stories, haven't we? More vineyards, more olives in the UK. Is that good? Who are the winners? Who are the losers? But we're going to have more droughts. We're going to have water that may not be quite as easy to access. I mean, if you know much about the rivers and the streams and the reservoirs in this country already, some of the water that we get is piped for many hundreds of miles in some cases. So already we've got quite sophisticated systems to get water to where it needs to get to. What's the future of those sorts of systems in the future? But this whole idea of planning and farmers planning, and for us planning, it's going to be difficult and problematic in the future. So floods and storms and extreme heat will cause disruption and will affect transport and will affect health. So I particularly want to focus on this idea of water, how we use it, how we store it, and how we process it. It's linked obviously to weather and climate, and the climate in the UK. It's about temperature and how our spaces are equipped to cope with it. I could have talked for a lot longer about buildings, but I'm not going to talk about those particularly today. But it's about the weather and understanding our particular island, because it will impact us differently to other places. So at the heart of all this is often the water cycle. And you may well recognize that graphic from many of the experiences that you've had with children. And I often look at that and think, gosh, that doesn't look like anywhere I know. That doesn't represent any landscape I've ever seen. It looks quite unrealistic. So sometimes I show student teachers this one. This is from Thames Water. And this is quite a helpful one because it has some of the other elements in terms of the urban water cycle, because we pretty much all live in urban areas. We live in places that don't really resemble that first graphic. So it's the kind of difference between the natural spaces, the natural kind of vocabulary that we might develop in the water cycle, which is on the graphic there, and this kind of more realistic graphic. This is what we need to perhaps be starting to think about: how water that falls from the sky, what happens to it? Where is it going? Where is it percolating? Where is it ending up? And what are the impacts of that water in our particular landscapes? If you've never come across the urban water cycle, there's lots of good graphics on that. So I want you to critically look at the spaces around you. I forget which school I got these from, so if you know, I'd love to know, because I can't credit them. But these are photographs of an average school playing field. This is an artificial hill, presumably from some sort of building work, but just look at it. Look at how the water must have impacted on that landscape. Look at how the people have impacted on that landscape, how that human and physical aspect have interacted together. Look at the age of the trees and what impact the trees have. Clearly they perhaps stop air pollution, perhaps stop some sound pollution as well, but they're not very old trees, but they will be trapping some of that water that falls from the sky. But where does the water fall? What happens to it? Where does it run? Could you stand on the top of the hill like that and have a hose pipe and see where the water runs? I mean, we're all not lucky enough to have a hill like that in our playground, but just look at the eroded areas. I'm quite fascinated and obsessed by erosion. And I perhaps want you to get thinking about your particular spaces and how the water that falls from the sky interacts with the spaces that you've got. Maybe look for these areas where the grass has been worn away. Look for the wet and worn away footpaths. Look for the shortcuts, the elephant paths, the desire lines, the erosion, the full puddles, the dry puddles, the dips in the land. Look at potholes. Why are potholes forming? Are there going to be more potholes in the future? Look at the rotting wood. We all have homes that have rotting wood and we look at them and don't do much about them. There's lots of that in schools as well. Streaking on windows, splashes, green mold, moss in cracks, things growing from broken tarmac, all these different things that we could look at that start to talk about how our environment is changing because of the heating, but also because of the cooling and the frost, but also because of the water, in particular, the water soaking in the water changes the many, many spaces in your school ground. So have a think about the spaces you know about and try and formulate a story. Go for a water walk or an impact of water walk on your school grounds. So, I mean, these are just some photographs I've taken over time to try and bring this story of water, erosion, human impacts, impacts from transport in some of the spaces I know of. There's a lot going on here if you stand, if you look, if you start to unpack. And this is the kind of starting point to have this conversation about how our local world may start to change if the weather starts to change more frequently, or if it becomes hot and cold and freezes and dries and so on, because cracking and big things can happen like this on the Isle of Wight, really amazing landslips. And sometimes, like on the south coast of England, you might see landslips like this, which will come from nowhere, from this impact from the water from the sky or from the changes in the rock. There's an image of Scotland, erosion again. Some of this caused by humans, obviously by cars, by bikes and all sorts of other things, but also exacerbated by this water falling from the sky. And it's a big story, because the bigger story is that we're going to lose some of our soil. We're going to lose some of this precious growing material that we need to make sure that we can feed ourselves. So we've got this very, very local story. Oh, it's a bit of erosion, it's a bit of an elephant path, but actually this will have big impacts. And you can see there floods in Germany just the other year, really, really exacerbating because of that intense rainfall. So we've got desertification, we've got land degradation, vegetation loss, not talked about fire. We had fires last summer in the 40-degree heats. We've got a whole range of different things coming down the line, this kind of bigger picture that can come from those early conversations from your school site. You may have come across these: rain gardens, sustainable drainage systems, particularly in London where I am. There's lots and lots of these, helping to trap that water, stopping it from going in the sewage system, stopping it going and rushing into the streams and the rivers too quickly and causing flooding. So these sorts of things are really interesting mitigations. They're not the solution to everything, but there's something that could be seen as a positive, because there's a lot of doom and gloom, a lot of negative that you've heard already from me. But these are some of the sorts of things that children may advocate that you should have more of in your school. How much tarmac do you have? What's the percentage of tarmac compared to green? Have you got a no mow May policy in your school? You may have heard of that over the last few weeks. That's happened in many parts of the country. So start to think about these stories about how that water is trapped and stored. So the last thing I just want to talk to you about is to introduce you to somebody called Lee. Lee works in the Lake District. Lee works in Haweswater, and he works for the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. And he's a manager on the Haweswater estate. And he's written a great book, lots of book recommendations today. This is one for you to consider. Beautifully illustrated book from the front cover. And his job is to make sure that those golden eagles come back to the Lake District, because they're not there at the moment, and he was there as the last one disappeared, and he's fighting for nature on this Lake District hill farm. And there's various podcasts where he's been interviewed, various YouTube videos you can find, and these are just some screen grabs from his YouTube talk that he's given about his book that I recommend you having a look at. So this is the valley where he works, and you can see there a pretty typical Lake District upland hill landscape and fell. And basically what's happening there is his job, their challenge, is to try and take what has been a canalized river, a river that's not wiggly, a river without the meanders, and turn it into what you can see on the right hand side. Their journey is to try and start to change that landscape. Again, this is a contentious thing. There are some people for it, some people are against it. So I'm not saying that this is a neutral act, but we're trying to bring that river back to life from that canalized, rushing stream, very straight-sided, very unnatural, to try and bring it back to life. Sometimes through bringing in big diggers and moving lots of gravel, sometimes through nature doing its own thing. But particularly one of their ideas is through rewilding. And you may have heard of that concept, through possibly reintroducing beavers. And there are parts of the country where those have been reintroduced, to have these ecosystem engineers, as they're called, back in the landscape, back, stopping the flooding downstream, stopping that water that will cause people in the Lake District and further afield from getting the benefit from the water, because we need the water, we will need the water in the future. But that's really the story that they're trying to advocate. But worth listening to his full explanation, because it's a really powerful one to kind of articulate what that journey has been like for him. So happy to send you the slides if you're interested. Happy to give you more information there. A great book I'd recommend, but we'd love to hear in the chat about anything that you've kind of found today that was useful. And Julia, I'll hand back to you.
Right, thank you, Anthony, so much. That was an absolutely... Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. Looked like you couldn't. Sorry, everybody. Thank you, Anthony, so much for that absolutely brilliant exploration of water, taking it from the extremely local in the school grounds out to one of our iconic landscapes in the Lake District. Just an absolutely fabulous presentation, as were the others we've had this afternoon. I'd just like to thank everybody who's come this afternoon, all the people who've attended. I'd particularly like to thank all our contributors, the GeogLive team, Stephen and Steve, Sophie, Anthony, Tess talking about primary geography, and of course all the wider members of the early years and primary committee of the GA, who do a lot of support for us in the background. We do hope some of you will join us at Conference 2024, which will take place at the University of Manchester. It's the 4th to the 6th of April, so it'll be in the school holidays. If you'd like to follow up any of the ideas from today, please do look at what's going to be what's in the chat at the moment. And of course, you can also go back to all our previous webinars on our YouTube channel. And I'm sure Anthony will be posting this last one for this academic year later on today or tomorrow. So the archive is there for you all to see. We really would like your feedback about what you would like for next year. The GeogLive team is meeting in a couple of weeks to plan our programme for the next academic year, and we're really interested to know what it is people would like us to cover. So do get in touch either on our Twitter account, or you can get in touch with Anthony through his email address, which was on the screen just now. Our next GeogLive will of course be in September, after I hope you've all had the most fantastic summer holiday. It will be either the 2nd or the 3rd week in September, so likely to be the 13th or the 20th of September. We haven't actually decided yet. But in the meantime, I wish you all an absolutely great summer break. I'm sure you all are really looking forward to having a break, probably counting the days by now. I know lots of people who are already doing that. So thank you very much from the GeogLive team and from the Early Years and Primary Committee of the GA for coming to our GeogLive sessions this year. And we really hope to see some of you next year at the sessions or at conference. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Have a good evening.